Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Bullets and Bourbon. I'm Matt Gunlock, and I'm joined with my guest co-host and good friend Brittany Long. And today we're interviewing Brittany's mom, Karen. I'm really excited for this episode because it's a bit different from past episodes, but very relevant in the grand scheme of things. Karen is a retired Deputy U.S. Marshal, a mother, and an amazing woman. Before we uh before we get started into the questions, Karen, can you go ahead and just give a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. I'm from Parkersburg, West Virginia, and um, got into law enforcement in 1998. I worked as a correctional officer before that from 1993 to 1998, and worked in DC and then ended up in West Virginia for the rest of my career.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, I commend you. I mean, not many people in general really decide to go law enforcement, but I think we're all like-minded folks here. Me coming from the military side and wanting to get involved in, service to country, service to community, and then, you and, you know, I know Brittany has aspirations of going that direction as well. So, I mean, I think we're all like-minded people here and have the same kind of attributes in the type of people that we are. Um, but I gotta ask, in previous episodes I talked about, and people have asked me, when did you know you wanted to be in the military? I always said, realistically, from the age of 5 or 6, I kind of always wanted to do that. But at what point in your life did you realize that you wanted to be in law enforcement?
I think it's always been in my blood. And the reason I say that is I always took up for the bullied kids. When I was a teenager, when somebody would be bigger than somebody else and being pushed around by them, I would step in. And my parents didn't like that a whole lot. But I think it probably started then and wanted to do some good in the community. And I don't know. It just seemed like it was kind of a funny story because when I became a correctional officer, I saw the marshals coming in and out of the back door, and I was like, "Who are these people?" Because I would always see, the sheriff's department, or they'd be hauling for state and local cases, but the feds would come in occasionally, and it'd be the marshals, and they'd be picking up a prisoner. And I started looking into it and was like, "That's what I want to do right there."
So, I mean, you kind of already answered the question of when you got your start in law enforcement. You said you started in corrections before you became a deputy U.S. Marshal. But, and I know you're not the type of person that thinks like this. Like whether you're a man or a woman, you're a law enforcement officer, and that's all that matters. And you don't want to be treated any differently from one person to the next. But I do want to ask you, what was it like for women in law enforcement when you did start?
Most of the people I worked with were really cool. They were fine with. I mean, some of the old school guys. I mean, we're talking this is 1998, and some of the old school guys didn't see a place for women in law enforcement. But I always chalk that up to if it was a generational gap, and I didn't pay much attention to it, and that didn't happen very often. It was usually the people that were retired and came back as court security officers that kind of felt that way. But they
The
they
old
worked in a
back in my day people.
yeah, and that's it's kind of like how you grow up, or how you things that shaped you as you were going through your own career. And maybe they had bad experiences, I'm not sure, but most of the people I worked with were really cool with women being in law enforcement. I mean, as long as you could handle yourself physically and mentally. And I never really felt like I had to prove myself. um it just it just was something, you either did it or you didn't. And, there were guys that were questionable, like,
Mhm.
when things threw down, are they going to be there? Are they going to have your back and jump in and help you, or are they going to shy away? So it went either way.
You know, um, I here in the military, like, we've had women in the military for a long time. Ofa Mae Johnson, one of the first women Marines that ever joined, I think she was. I could be completely wrong on that, but I know Ofa Mae Johnson was a famous Marine woman. Um, but for instance, they recently, within the last 10 years, allowed females in the infantry, and they've opened a lot of opportunities for Marines to get into the combat arms field. And I know a lot of people have their opinions on it. And, at first I had my opinions, and then I met some phenomenal, women who became Marine officers, and even some that were just enlisted Marines in those careers. And I mean, the way I've kind of developed as a person and matured as a human being is, you know, people talk about standards and everything else, and as long as they can hold the standard and you don't drop the standard for somebody else, and they can hold their own, why not? Some people don't agree with that thought process, but I think one, it's a maturity issue, and it's new, it's different, and it's the hot topic, but um, you know there were male Marines that couldn't pass the physical fitness test, and they're complaining, "Oh, we shouldn't have females in the infantry." And it's like, bro, you can't even hold the physical standard, so shut the fuck up. But
I
I
hear
mean,
you.
it's always, I think it's always going to be a hot topic, at least in the military side.
Hmm.
And I think in certain cases, women shouldn't be in those positions, but in many other cases, they should. I don't think you should take that away from them.
I think
It
everybody brings something to the table. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, you're absolutely right.
I think
Everybody thinks
everybody brings
differently.
something to the table. Some people are logistically sound. They may not be as tactically sound, but logistics wise, they're great.
Hmm.
And same goes the other direction. But it's also true with, like you said, with males, the same situation. So
But as you progress through your career, did you notice any change in how women were treated, or did they always, did some have to prove themselves more than others?
I think those that had to prove themselves were probably lacking a little bit to begin with until they build up confidence. I always felt like proving yourself as a female was kind of a self-inflicted mentality. I
I
think
would
we,
agree.
I like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
it's self-inflicted because we kind of put that pressure on ourselves. Something I always told Brittany, I always preach to her, nobody has the right to make you feel a certain way. That's your privilege. That's not theirs. They don't own that. You do. And no matter what they do, what they say, it doesn't matter. And so as long as you have a positive outlook on things and you don't, inflict that mentality on yourself, you just do your job,
Hmm.
conduct yourself professionally and with confidence. And so it depends on how you acted. And the same with men again.
Yeah. So I got one last question before I'm turning it over to Brittany. But you served as a deputy U.S. Marshal, and how long were you in the Marshal Service, and what drove you to want to become a deputy U.S. Marshal?
I think I started in 1998. So I was in the Marshal Service for 20 years. I retired in 2018. And I think the main reason is I wanted to make an impact. Um, I wanted to I had this desire to actively pursue fugitives. I mean, I think that was probably the coolest part of my job was going after fugitives, and that's state and locals. And I can't give them enough props because without state and local officers, we wouldn't be able to do nearly what we do or what I did. But basically, the I was driven with a strong sense of probably duty and commitment for the safety of the public. I saw a great need for that in my career, and I think that that's what held me on too was, you want to make a difference. You want to make a difference in your own community. You want to make a difference nationwide. So, and I think that's something that we strive to achieve.
No, that's a beautiful answer.
Well, Mom, I have some questions for you. Um,
Oh boy.
nothing too bad. Nothing too bad.
Okay.
Um, so I guess just from your point of view, from everyone that you've seen, and just for yourself, and what kind of deputy marshal that you were, what do you feel like it takes to be a good deputy U.S. marshal? And with that in that same vein, what types of people should probably stay away from law enforcement, or what are the wrong reasons for getting in? What are the right reasons? What's it take to be a good one?
No, that's a good question. I'm going to say, and these are in no certain order probably, but communication skills is huge. You have to be able to communicate with people, your coworkers, fugitives' families, in order to get information about where they are. You have to have people skills and be a good communicator. I would say you need to be strong mentally and physically. You have to be able to work under pressure in dangerous situations. A good solid understanding of criminal law doesn't hurt either. And integrity. That's huge. So
I got a quick question on that, because you brought up having to deal with like a fugitive's family and everything, and I assume that takes a certain level of empathy when you don't want to have empathy, because it's like, okay, this asshole, this is this asshole's family, but you got to understand that they're not the one that committed the crime. You're irritated, upset, but you still have to handle it in a mature fashion. What was it like dealing with a fugitive's family whenever you're trying to actually find them?
I always tried to I really tried to show a lot of respect to people and hope to get it in return. Um, I always felt like, that could be my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, that was the family standing in front of you, and you're trying to locate them, and you're trying to let them know, listen, this is the best way to get them in safely. We don't want them in a situation where, they end up in a shootout. They do something stupid, and, let us know where he is or she is, and we can go get them safely. And it was difficult to, and usually you start out, pretty nice about it. And then you throw the 18 USC code to them about harboring, and that usually got them to give it up because they didn't want to be charged with harboring a fugitive, and just the knowledge of them knowing where they were. And I wouldn't be standing in front of them asking them if I didn't know they knew. And I think that was the biggest thing was, you start out with respect. And I sometimes use the mother role on mothers. A lot of times I would say, listen, I'm a mother. And, I didn't put that out there a lot, obviously, but listen, if this was my child, I would want them to be taken in safely. And if you give us information on where we can find them, then, we'll be able to hopefully attain that.
Yeah. I liked you gave me a book to read a few years ago. Um it's Inside America's Most Storied Law Enforcement Agency, and it's by Mike Earp, who is a deputy U.S. Marshal. He's related to Wyatt Earp. And anyway, in that book he talks a lot about just other, do some stories, and um how they tried to like find information and the different roles you have to play. And you kind of have to be a good actor and actress too. Like you kind of have to, and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but the way, he wrote those stories was being able to figure out what makes that person tick and have, those interpersonal skills to figure out what's going to make them give me the information that I want, and to have that, extra level of like psychology in the back of your mind to be able to pick their brain and get them to tell you what you want.
Exactly. That's why talking to them is so important prior to, because you get a feel for whether the person is, totally anti-police, or, and is going to buck up on you at any given second, or you get the idea that they're just scared for their loved one. And it gives you an idea of which route to take. It all plays in, and it's interesting. It's interesting to learn all the different techniques. I mean, you have some guys who want to go in headstrong and bully their way and just start out being a jerk, and that never worked for me. Everybody has their own way of doing it, and you'll find that out. And there are some in law enforcement who don't think you should ever be nice, and I don't agree with that. We're there to serve the community, and like Matt said, they didn't do it. It was their
Yeah,
son or daughter or family member. So getting to the point where you can communicate with that individual, and that's probably why I mentioned that first on being a good dewsome, is the ability to talk to people. You have to be able to talk to people to be successful in your job.
absolutely. And I think some of those skills are taught. Some of those skills can be learned, like learning the criminal justice system and the law. Those are things you can learn. But I liked how you finished that up with integrity. That's not something you teach somebody. I think you're either born with that or you're not. I
Absolutely.
think, I mean, maybe some of the way that you're raised, you got that nature versus nurture, but I think you are either a person that has a strong moral compass or you're in it for the wrong reasons. So I like that you included that for sure. And in that same line of thinking, with what it takes to be a good one, what would you tell other folks, including me, who are looking to start a career in law enforcement?
um, it's a very demanding job. You don't clock in and out. Matt can attest to this, being in the military. It's not a clock in and clock out and you leave it at the office.
You are
You
married
Hmm.
to that organization.
Yes, you were married to it. And I'm not even sure that's accurate. It's stronger than that, if there is
Hmm.
such a thing. But it can be demanding, and you can get called out at any time, and you have to have contingency plans. We always had a plan B and a plan C for you, Brittany. Um, my mom was instrumental in, at the drop of a hat, I'd call her and she was 4 hours away. She'd jump in the car, pack a bag real quick, jump in the car and drive up there and take care of you, because, your dad and I both are in law enforcement. And sometimes we got pulled in different directions and she would come to the rescue. But probably some other stuff I would say is you need to have good decision making skills. And we talked about communication with people skills. And the main thing is ability to handle high pressure situations with composure. And I think that's where maturity comes in, is being able to keep yourself composed, under a stressful situation. Um, Always remain ethical. I think that's huge. Stay true to
Absolutely.
yourself and others. I mean, that's huge. And no power trips because you're wearing a badge. I don't think there's a place for that. You're there to serve and protect your community and maintain peace and order. And nowhere does it say I'm above the law because I wear a badge. You're not. You're
Absolutely.
representative of the law, and you need to set the example.
Absolutely. As a retiree, um, and knowing those kind of things, what you feel like makes a good law enforcement officer, a good deputy marshal, and things to look out for, to better yourself, to start a career in law enforcement. As a retiree and having lived it for, over 20 years, what are some changes that you'd like to see, within the U.S. Marshal Service, the Department of Justice, or honestly just law enforcement and the culture in general?
That's a tough one. Probably. I always feel like the Marshal Service is a top-notch agency. There's great people that work there when I was there, and there's still great people that work there. Oldest law enforcement agency in the country. But they need more deputies and the budget to do so. I think if there was any change within the Marshal Service, it would need to be that. There's 10,000 or more FBI field agents across the nation, and probably 35,000 that work for them and total, but 10,000 field agents. There's 3,800 Deputy U.S. Marshals and probably 6,000 or so that work for them. And we need more deputies for sure.
Absolutely. Um, so, I know quite a few of your stories and the things that you went through, growing up listening to you and watching you work that career. You were part of the investigation team at the Pentagon, after 9/11. Is that something that you would want to talk about with us and, maybe describe some of the events from like the moment that you got called up, to when the investigation concluded, how long it lasted, how you felt going through that then and even now, or, is that something you'd want to stay away from? What are your thoughts about that?
No, I'd be glad to talk about it. One thing I haven't done is look back into what's been released, and with secret or top secret or classified material, you have to be careful there. So
Right.
once I know more about that, I could probably talk more about it. But I can talk about it some. But I was coming through the tunnel in DC on 66. You're familiar with 66, right, Matt?
Oh yeah, I hate
Oh yeah,
66.
good old 66. And I was coming through there through the tunnel when the plane hit the Pentagon, and already knew about the New York situation on the way, into DC. DC was a complete gridlock. Constitution Avenue, everything was gridlocked with vehicles because people were trying to get out of DC knowing that it was a terrorist act at that point, and just trying to get away from obviously the White House or the Capitol and any of those uh, settings. But as I was going through the tunnel and came out on the other side, my first inclination was to go to the Pentagon, help however I could. But immediately we saw one of our judges on Constitution Avenue stuck in gridlock traffic trying to get out. And we, of course, snatched him up and drove down through the Grass Mall area and got him to a safe location. And they called us all in and dispatched us to report to the courthouse immediately. And a lot of groups were sent in different directions. I was part of the team that was sent to investigate at the Pentagon, and that entailed sifting through all the rubble, inch by inch, for evidence. And they had different containers set up for different items. So, if you found a piece of the plane, you'd put it in one area. If you found personal items, you put it in another. Um, on a more graphic level, body parts were put in another section. But we found some interesting stuff. I won't go into details about that too much, except, it was items that were found on the plane or in that rubble that weren't part of, Matt can attest to this, the Pentagon has logs of every single item they ever purchase. And so they knew if a certain instrument wasn't necessarily one that they would have purchased to use, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, there was different things, different documentation found that was, uh, the terrorists belonged to the terrorists for sure. And after that, I was probably there, I'd say a couple weeks. I mean, the investigation lasted a lot longer than that, but we were assigned for probably a couple weeks, and it was 12-hour shifts. Again, your grandmother, Brittany, came to the rescue because we had her come and pick you up from daycare when you were little. You were only one, not even one at the time, I think. And, she drove straight there and picked you up and took you back to the house and kept you safe. And I was pulling 12 and 14-hour shifts at the Pentagon. And commute was about an hour and 45 minutes, typically one way.
You lived
So,
out of Martinsburg at the time, right?
yeah, absolutely, yes, yes. And so, when there was no traffic, you could get into the city in an hour from there, maybe less. But with traffic, it was bad. And it was an hour and 45 each way, sometimes two, sometimes I could do it an hour and 40, but made it a little tough. But anyway, did you have anything else you wanted from me? I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries.
What was the
Just
overall emotions like with
yeah.
everybody there? Like,
It was very solemn. It was very quiet. I worked nights, so everybody was pretty quiet. When you're doing a job like that, and Matt, you can attest to this, you have to almost, I hate to say
Internalize.
yeah, you don't
Yeah.
shut down your emotions,
Yep.
but you
You
have a
go in a
job.
different mode. Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, even in my role now,
you have a job to
I
do.
hate to
Yeah.
say you kind of you switch into a different role. You kind of do become an actor in like I have to do this thing, I have to talk about this hard thing, I have to go do this hard thing, and um you kind of just have to put yourself in a different whole different mode. And it's a whole different ball game, what I do now as an advocate than versus digging through rubble like that trying to find survivors. But
Yeah. It was interesting because, sometimes I would find, military uniforms, and that was tough. We
yeah.
didn't know if that was a uniform that was hanging in somebody's office, just hanging there, or was somebody in that uniform. I mean, not to be graphic about it, but we had to shake uniforms, and sometimes body parts would come out, and it was rough. It was rough to deal with after the fact. You go home, and I'm trying to go home as a mother, and when I did see you be upbeat and everything's fine, you're safe, everything's fine. But that's tough, because of what you've seen and what everybody else went through. It was tough.
Talking about the emotional side of things, and and you dealt with it on a local level, like back home, which nobody ever expects to deal with that level of emotional trauma, um, in a large scale event that occurred like that, you know, here, and it happened, overseas, in war. You expect some level of trauma to occur, but you're never truly ready for it.
Hmm.
So like whenever Larry, one of my friends, died, when we were on an operation, it was it it was a shock to everybody. Nobody ever expected Larry to die. He died. We had four other guys get wounded in combat, and kind of like what Brittany said, you almost internalize everything. You shut down,
Hmm.
and you shut your emotions off for the rest of the time that you're out there, and you're there to do a job,
Yep.
to the point where I don't want to say you become an asshole to everybody else that's not in the military, and you're kicking doors down, you're going through houses, you're searching houses, and you don't give a fuck about anybody else except you and the boys. And that's what it
Right.
comes down to. And in many facets, it's a very dangerous place to be, because at the same time you're there to try and help those people.
Mhm.
um there You don't realize the amount of trauma that they've been through since the war started, and what they've been having to deal with from a local and foreign insurgent perspective. So, and you almost don't care. But like, thinking back, from a more mature point of view, I guess you can say, you almost feel for them, because you were there to help them. They could have provided you a level of intelligence and information that could have assisted in your operation. And uh and you know it's easy to blow. You lose that trust, and they don't want to have that trust at the same time, because whatever they say to you, if the foreign or even local insurgents find out that they're talking to Americans, they're going to get their heads chopped off.
Yeah,
So,
and that's really in some ways a little bit similar to fugitive investigations with the family talking. They fear for their own safety,
mhm.
We have that
Mhm.
even on just a more minor level here, like locally. I mean, minor, I don't know, but um, even just here in southern West Virginia, like there's 20 some witnesses we might have to a murder, and not a single one of them will talk to the police because they're scared, or it's the street code, or it's just whatever culture that like is in that little community that's just like we can't, we won't, we can't, we won't help you. We won't talk about it.
Hmm.
And to be able to just get the job done, it's super frustrating. But I don't know. I think, you know, circling back a little bit to those of us that are wanting to start our career in law enforcement, I think that or any type of first responder, military, point of view, I think you guys are a gold mine here to be able to talk about like the emotional side of things and the stuff that you're gonna have to go through that they just can't prepare you for at an academy or at boot camp.
Now they'll show you a lot of videos. Matt can attest to this. You'll see a lot of videos that try to prepare you, but you're not in the situation. I
Yeah.
mean, everybody has a little bit of empathy in them, whether some people have a lot, but I could always put myself in somebody's shoes really well, sometimes too well. That was a curse for me sometimes. But it really makes you think. You watch those videos and it makes you think, but you're not there. So it's a whole different ball game when you're there, and you've got to be able to process things. And it's not necessarily a right way for one person. I mean, I come from around the old school people where talking to a therapist or seeking mental health help was
It was
you didn't
It's
do
taboo.
that.
taboo,
Oh,
yeah.
taboo, absolutely. It made you weak. I mean, they perceived you as weak. And I'm glad to see that shift. I think providing more mental health help out there for individuals, whether it be in the military or law enforcement, they need to stay healthy, physically and mentally. So I'm glad that it's not so taboo anymore. That's important.
I remember after my first deployment after my first Iraq deployment, before my second Iraq deployment, and after my second Iraq deployment, we had to go take these mental health exams to see where we were at mentally. And like, it was just a bunch of different questions. And I mean, they were written in such a way to where you can kind of guess what kind of answers you wanted to put down because like if you were about to go on a deployment and you put things down that questioned whether or not you were sane enough or mentally capable enough,
Stable.
yeah, stable, um they weren't going to bring you on a deployment,
Mhm.
or you were going to get benched, and it's like nobody wants that shit. And so you lied, and it was very common to stretch the truth
I'm
on
fine.
what
I'm
your mental,
fine.
yeah. And nowadays it's you know I would say there is still taboo within the military, at least from my perspective, just because I still have some of that old school mentality. Have I seen a therapist? Yeah, I have, and it was extremely weird. It was extremely difficult. Um, you know, have I learned how to deal with my problems on my own in many ways? Absolutely. Um, but I think like you said, the outlet is there now to where it's your career's not going to be over if you go seek help.
That's right.
Um, and that in and that in and of itself is beautiful. It's a beautiful change within the
Mhm.
community. That because like even for any other medical conditions, oh, I'm fine. I can still go hard. I can still do this. I can still do that. Like, you didn't want to go to medical because you didn't want to get benched.
I think that's a big part with mental health issues and law enforcement historically, and I think less now. I think we're doing better as a whole for military and first responders, but I think that's part of it, right? Like that I don't I don't want to be looked at like I'm incapable of doing the job. I don't want to look like not only I'm weak, but I'm light duty, so to speak, or I'm not
Well,
up to
that's what
par.
we call it. That we call it light duty in the military.
Mm-hmm.
You're on light
Mhm.
duty until you're back to full duty status.
Same
Mm-hmm.
way with law enforcement.
Yep. And I think that's a big part of if we can try to remove that stigma. Like it's more to me the way I look at it, and I think law enforcement nowadays are starting to get it. Um, it's more like you clean your rifle, right, to make sure it's functional, make sure it's totally up to speed, and that it's in fully operational working condition. Do that with your mental health. Do that with your physical health. It's
Yeah,
all the
I
same.
I had a back in 2007. I got injured in training, and it was kind of stupid. We were told, "Hey, we're gonna ground fight now." So okay, I'm gonna ground fight. Well, I got paired up with a dude that was 60 pounds heavier than me. His knee came down on my shoulder, and a year before I had shoulder surgery. So it was still it was healed, but it was still not 100%. Well, when his knee came down, he popped my clavicle out of my sternum.
Hmm.
And um in the moment, yeah, like I didn't feel anything. I heard the pop, went to the hospital. They said nothing was wrong with me. It wasn't getting better. I went back to the medical officer. He was like, "You dislocated your sternum from your collarbone." Okay, what do I have to do to fix it? You have to do nothing. You are not allowed to go to the field. You're not allowed to train. You can't do a thing. And for me, that was one of the hardest things. And he's like, "Look, I'm telling you right now, if I find out you go to the field and you're training with your Marines and you're going out and doing everything, I'm pulling you from a deployment." And that woke me up real quick. It's like, okay, well, I got to heal, I got to get better, and I got to
Mhm.
do this. And I made that deployment, maybe not in the capacity I wanted to, but I still got to go on the deployment. I still got to do stuff. I just wasn't in the position I wanted to be in. Um,
That's
eh,
harder, isn't it? And I apologize if I interrupted you, but it's harder on you mentally than the actual injury,
mhm.
for sure.
Absolutely. But, it taught me a lesson. Like, your physical health is extremely important. So take care of your body. So, because if you are in a situation and you're not 100%, you're going to be more a detriment to the people around you, than if you're not there.
You got to set that ego
Yeah.
and that pride aside,
Hmm.
and do it for that reason, just like you said. And man, it's tough because you want to be in there. You want to be in the fight, so to
Yeah.
speak, for
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
Not to get totally off script here, and we can cut this if you want to, but I think in the same vein there, there's an officer very recently, and he's a local officer, not here, um, but he was a local law enforcement officer, and he had like a psychotic break. This is super, super recent, and he was just in some psychotic episode, no drugs involved, complete just mental health crisis. Everybody said he was a really good officer before that, but just lost it. And he ended up being a danger, to his own community. And while he was off duty, broke into a house and just completely manic, out of his mind, had no clue what was going on. And it was a tragedy. The way it ended up was a tragedy. And I think, to avoid situations like that, it starts off small. It starts off with, hey, I'm feeling some kind of way. Let's talk about this. If you're starting to feel like your shoulder's a little bit out of whack, you don't just completely ignore it, or at least once it starts hurting pretty bad, you're going to go get it checked out so that you're still going to be in the fight. And I think we need to really address that, do that with our mental health.
Well, you talk about that, and at some point, you got to question the leadership within the department. Just like if and I'm not saying it's the leadership's fault, but I would say part of it is probably the leadership's fault, to not recognize what is happening. Um, and you know, we're actually gonna talk about this whenever we do our next interview with Adam from Odysseus and the Ore. But um, there's a book called Black Hearts, and it's about an army unit that deploys overseas, and the morale is so low, and the leadership is just so disinterested in the actual welfare of the troops and making sure that they're taken care of and getting the resources and logistics that they need, that there's a complete breakdown in discipline within that entire unit. And you know people are getting killed every day, people are getting injured, people are just not doing the right thing. And it ended in the rape and murder of a young Iraqi girl, and the murder of the entire family. um and there were a lot of lessons learned and from that book. uh and I think it starts at the top. Leadership needs to recognize issues whenever they start arising, and if they had recognized that this person isn't 100%, they should have gotten him the help that he needs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good segue too into our into your next episode. Um, but yeah, that's a really good point. I'm excited to talk about that. Um, I'm gonna completely shift gears now and try to focus because we got a little dark there for a second. I want to try to focus on some more of the positive here. Um, you know, that was an investigation you were super proud of. I know that was really difficult. That was hard to go through. I know that's something that you still struggle with sometimes now. Um, and every year that 9/11 rolls around, I know that that's something that weighs on you a little bit. But I know you're super proud of it. You're also not one to toot your own horn. But I know you got a lot of awards from that, and we're all super proud of you. That's a big highlight of your career, something great that you've done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
What other notable investigations and missions that you were a part of that you felt like you were super pleased with? Just how everything turned out, start to finish, and or even just a fun story that you have, from your time as a deputy.
Mm. Um, an interesting story is one of the things we had to do as Deputy U.S. Marshals in Washington, D.C., they don't have a sheriff's department. They have Metro Police and then they have feds.
Uniform Secret Service.
Yeah. So they we had to do evictions. The marshals had to do evictions.
Huh.
And we basically would do, because it's a service of process, and typically a sheriff's department would do that, but DC doesn't have a sheriff's department. So we did it. We would do each team, we'd do 72 evictions a day, 12 per team. And they actually had crews that would go in and clean the place out. And that was rough sometimes because there was kids involved, but one of the more notable ones that comes to mind is it was in Northwest, and it was a video DJ for BET, come to find out. But we went in to do the eviction and for non-payment of rent for months and months. And I ended up, we go in and clear a place first to make sure there's nothing dangerous laying out, knives, guns, anything like that, before a hired crew comes in and cleans the place out. But one of the crew members said, "Hey, there's a bag under this bed, and I want you to check it out." And so I go over and look at it, and looks like blood's coming out of it. So investigate a little further, and it's an actual dead body, and it was the video DJ or whatever you call them, for BET, and had gotten in a with his partner, had got into an argument, and the partner killed him and had put him in a foldable bike bag and shoved him under the futon. And that was interesting because part of the eviction was already in process, so some of the stuff was already down to the curtilage, the curb, and it was a full blown, obviously a
Oh,
murder
yeah.
investigation. Yeah, it was
Oh,
interesting.
holy crap. That's crazy.
I had never told you that story, huh?
No. So, like, part of the way through this eviction, you're like, oh my gosh, we just completely dismantled the crime scene without knowing it was a crime scene.
Oh yeah, the crime scene was strung from the apartment all the way down to the curb. So
Holy
Metro
cow.
PD, who came in to investigate it, was a little thrown aback.
Oh, yeah, I'd say so. I mean, what do you do though? You don't expect during an eviction you're gonna find a body in the closet. That's crazy. Or
Exactly.
where'd you say he was?
And he had put him in a fold-up bike bag, with a zipper, and wrapped him in a quilt. And he was a smaller statured guy, so I mean, maybe 5'5". Sorry, Matt. And anyway,
I'm
oh,
I am 5'6".
oh, I'm sorry. This guy
And
was
a
five
half.
five, so he was shorter in stature.
Actually
So
5'5 3/4".
Who's counting?
oh, who's
Exactly.
counting, right? So yeah, he
Always
stuffed him
round
in a
up.
that's right, in a bike bag, and put him under the futon. So
Dang. That's wild. Any
mhm.
other like stories or missions that you have that was interesting or fun or that you're happy with?
Mm, Melissa Clemens with the state police. She was involved in an investigation with me. It was a couple out of, I believe, Canada. And somebody had reported that they had a caged child in Bluefield. We were like, caged, you know? So I called Melissa. She was the go-to with the state police when it came to child advocacy things, but investigations especially. And she went with me, and sure enough, they had a child caged in a room, and we were able to remove that child, obviously, safely, and ended up healthy, and arrested the two individuals, and I think they were deported back to Canada. So
Hmm, that's wild. I'm glad you guys were able to get that child taken care of. That's
I,
fantastic.
absolutely. I
That
don't
is a
remember the
success.
detail. I don't remember a lot of the details of it. It's been a while, and I'm getting older. But yeah, it was an interesting case, and collaboration with state and local law enforcement is huge. You know, and any job you do, always keep your state and locals close with you. They're the ones with their feet on the ground in the communities. You know, they know the people. They know, they get the calls, the dispatch calls, so they're familiar with the people in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's awesome. And it sounds like just working with, local law enforcement that knows the area and, you know, deals with the same clientele all the time like that helped you be successful. That's awesome.
Our
Um,
other mission, sorry, the other mission that I liked doing was we had an operation called Operation Falcon, and it ran for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, where we would gather state and local law enforcement, and we would get any warrants that they had outstanding that, the the person might be across state lines there in Bluefield. It could be over in Bluefield, Virginia. Well,
mhm.
they didn't have jurisdiction to go over there. Or if you send a collateral out to somebody, I mean, if you call somebody and ask them to look into it, they usually will, but it's not a priority for them. It's not their warrant, and
Right,
so.
it's a favor pretty much.
Right. So with the Marshal Service, if they referred those warrants, open warrants, because they thought they'd skip the area to us, we had the ability to send collateral leads out to other deputies, and they had so long to go check on it. And there was a lot of accountability with those collateral leads. And and I think that's why the Marshal Service is successful with, fugitive investigations, is because uh, marshals are typically good at finding their person. So.
Mhm. And it sounds like working with the locals too.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
that's
That's
awesome.
huge. That's huge. We couldn't do our job without them.
That's awesome. I love that. I think that's one of the things, that the Marshal Service really has figured out. Um, and that all the federal agencies can really take a note out of their book. That's awesome. Um, Tell me about navigating being a new and first time mom with me at the beginning of your career with the Marshals. Because you got in '98 and I came along 2 years later. Tell me about that all the way from uh, the time you got in or the time I was born or you're pregnant with me to retirement.
Well, I always wanted to be a mother, and I'm not sure why now, but I'm just kidding. But it was uh it was interesting, because once I became a mother, it was hard to go back to work. But I had that need and that want to fulfill my calling in law enforcement. So, you have to balance home life and work life, and it's tough. But thank goodness, your dad, we made a good team as far as making sure you were taken care of, and making sure that one person picked you up, and the other person dropped you off at daycare, and it takes a team effort to navigate that. I can remember going on details, and you would hate when you were little for me to leave. And sometimes I'd get sent away for 2 to 3 weeks at a time. And you were not happy as a young child about that. But I started a tradition with you where I would bring you back an ornament Sometimes it was a keychain because it would be June and I couldn't find a Christmas ornament. But anytime I went on detail, Boston or, one time I had to go to Puerto Rico, just different places I had to go, I always brought you back an ornament. And it gave you something to look forward to, uh, me being gone, that you could look forward to when I came back, that I would be bribing you, no, bringing you something back.
Yeah, I still have some stuff laying on my desk at work. Well, not, still, but I've moved into a new location and I have it sitting on my desk at work now. Um, some stuff that you've brought me back over the years when you've gone to trainings and stuff.
Yeah, I always look forward to doing that too because it helped me focus on whether it was training or whether it was an assignment, a detail that I had to go to. It helped me focus, and getting back to you and bringing that back, and it gave me something to look forward to, as far as when I got back to be able to give you that.
Mhm. Well,
I
I'll
got
say,
I want to ask something. Just because like I know you had to spend time away from home, and just like I did, and I remember on my last overseas assignment, I hadn't seen my family in almost a year. And I was just overseas the entire time and jumping from one location to another location.
Mm.
In some places, in some of the places were extremely austere environments. And I remember, you know, landing in Manchester, and my daughter had no idea I was gonna be at the airport. No idea that she was gonna see me for Christmas, because this was 3 days before Christmas. I almost got stuck in Turkey for 24 hours, and everything, like the entire trip from Djibouti, Africa to Turkey, it was just a complete nightmare. And I guilt tripped the airline company into giving me a one-way trip to Manchester, England. And when my daughter saw me for the first time, it was a sight that I'll never forget to this day. But like the eyes lit up and she realized, oh my God, dad's here. And mind you, like this was her third, you know, she wasn't even 4 years old, and it's her third deployment that I've been on at this point.
Mm.
But when those eyes lit up, it was probably one of the most memorable experiences, because it's like, oh my God, my dad's here to see me. And it was really
Mhm.
special. Did you ever, and I'm sure you did, but did you ever have any moments like that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and it was always such a joy. That gave me, like I said, it got me through some of those assignments. They weren't obviously as long as yours, and that had to have been rough, but it helped get me through the time that I had to be away from her, especially when she was 3 and 4 years old, and tough for her to understand. Mom's got to be gone, and but it gave me something to look forward to. It's similar, to that.
well, back then, like, I just thought you were my superhero. You're super cool. And like, mom's out there getting bad guys and saving the world. And I tell you what, not to be all mushy and sappy, but the novelty hasn't worn off yet. You're still my hero. So,
Oh, you're my hero though. So it's
Did you
mutual.
I got another question to that. Britt just kind of remind me of it. Like, at any point in your career, did Brittany ever ask you any of the hard questions? Like, did you ever have to, shoot anybody, or did you ever deal with a dangerous situation, stuff like that? Did she ever ask any of those hard questions growing up, and how did you respond?
She did. I tried to keep it real with her, depending on her age. I made it age appropriate,
Hmm.
because for the longest time, when we would see a dead animal on the side of the road, I would tell her it was a funny place for that deer to take a nap. But it had to be age appropriate of what I told her. But she didn't really start asking a lot of questions until she was a teenager, and then it didn't stop. No, I'm joking. Uh, but she and usually, like I said, kept it age appropriate, and depending on where she was in life.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I asked that because, like, I think it was last year or the year before, and Lily is she's 10 now. She'll be 11 in February. So she was probably around 7 or 8 years old. And out of the blue, like I was just sat on the couch and she was sat there with me and she was just like, Dad, did you ever have to kill anybody? And and I mean, initially your thoughts are, how do I answer this? And
Yeah.
honestly, I was like, well, you know what? I'm just gonna be real with her, and I was just like, yeah, I've had to kill people.
Mhm.
I was in some really bad areas, and she's like, well, were they bad people? Yeah, I mean, if I didn't take them out, they would have taken me out, or they would have killed some other innocent family that's out there. So yeah, I mean, I never killed anybody out of anger and hate. I did it out of duty and in service to country. And
Absolutely.
that resonated for her, and she'd seen me in uniform, coming home from work. She'd seen me dressed up in my blues before, but it really didn't resonate with her, the impact um of me being in the military, and until she saw my retirement ceremony, until she was part of my retirement ceremony. And
Yeah.
then that's where it really had the biggest effect, of she's like, "Oh, my dad really did some stuff." And some of my guys, one of my guys, Alex, he put together this highlight reel of my entire career from whenever I was a young boot, PFC, private PFC, all the way up until my retirement. And so
Wow.
she got to see, like the full spectrum of my career, from each of the places I'd been. And it kind of, that's what really resonated with her. Like, wow, my dad wasn't just gone because he had to be gone. He was gone because he had to actually go do stuff.
Yeah, and then it actually made her probably appreciate the military more because in that situation, there's got to be a little resentment that, the military took my dad,
Yeah.
and so it gave her a sense of purpose as to what you were doing and why, and I think that's huge.
Yeah. So, we got one last question for you, and Karen, you and I actually kind of had this conversation, whenever we were both at Mountain State, and we both have our thoughts on it, but I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts, out here. But how do you cope with, when you had situations where you weren't able to get any closure?
That's a tough one. I think talking to people, I think, and that's just happened in the last, and Brittany can attest to this because she's one of my go-tos. Um, this has just happened probably in the last 4 years, probably since she was 20, is talking to her and talking to Tom and praying a lot and realizing that I need to stay positive about things, even if it's a bad situation that I'm thinking about in the past that's happened. Um, Try to put a positive spin on everything and count my blessings as opposed to, and that's something I've always stressed to Brittany, is count her blessings and put the positive spin on it, because if you don't, what you think becomes, how you are or what you feel.
Hmm.
So put those positive thoughts back in your head and count your blessings about your health, about, a house, a home to live in, and your family and your relationship with God to be able to put things in perspective, and it's really helped me a lot.
No, I think that's extremely important, and I agree wholeheartedly. You can't control. I take a lot of stuff out of like the Stoic ideology or philosophy, I guess you can say, and you know, focus on the things that you can control, and don't worry about the things that you can't control. You're never going to be able to go back and fix the things that had occurred, but you can affect the outcome of you yourself and how you move forward.
Yeah, how you react to that situation or something that traumatic that happened in your past. That's exactly correct. And that's something I've always stressed to Brittany is, you know, don't stress over the little things, let
Hmm.
it be. I want to read a book and I can't remember who it's written by, but it's called Let It Be. And basically it's, the weather, you can't control the weather.
Hmm.
There's certain things you have control over and certain things you don't. Focus on what you can control.
Yeah, absolutely. And like for me, I took a lot of the lessons learned from that first deployment, and I, from then on out, I used all those lessons throughout the rest of my career to train my Marines. Like, hey, don't make the same mistakes I made. I'm a perfect example of, you know, of somebody you could not I don't want to say emulate, but you can take the lessons that I learned and make your experiences much better. Be better than what I was whenever I was in your position.
Isn't it
Um,
amazing too that how you look back and you think while you were in, if you knew what you know now,
oh, absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, maturity never stops
Hmm.
and knowledge never stops. And
Hmm.
I think it's interesting because had I known back when I was, 35, when I know now, I would have handled things a lot differently. I mean, I don't regret any way I handled any situation. I always tried to do things professionally but it just is amazing the knowledge you still gain as you get older.
Absolutely. And I mean, if when you're no longer learning and no longer trying to become better, you're becoming stagnant and you're not growing. And if you're not growing, what's the point?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But no, that's all I really have for this episode, unless there's anything that you do want to add.
I I just want to thank you for having me on here, and it felt good to tell a little bit of my story. It was a little healing, and I appreciate it a lot. Um, and I want to leave with a safety briefing. Brittany, do you remember the safety briefing when you became an adult that I used to give you? So
Yeah,
the,
go ahead.
the
I love it.
safety briefing is don't add to the population, don't
Oh.
subtract from the population, stay out of the hospital, stay out of the newspaper, and stay out of jail. If you end up in jail, establish dominance quickly.
I used to give very similar safety briefs whenever I was a platoon sergeant. It was very much the same.
Don't add to the population, don't subtract from it.
Yep.
Well, sometimes,
If you're gonna
I'm
do
happy
something,
to.
make sure it's double wrapped.
Oh, that's good stuff.
But
Good
no,
mothering.
Oh, that was
Brittany,
when you were older. I would give her that safety briefing.
Yeah,
That was
yeah. That
19 and
was.
up. Yeah.
I'd say 21 and up, actually. I
Yeah,
think
you're
it was
probably
drinking
right.
age.
You're probably right.
but no,
That's funny.
Brittany, I appreciate you coming on for this, and Karen, thank you so much. I think this was a great conversation, and I'd love to have
Absolutely.
more. But other than that, to the listeners, we hope you enjoyed this. We hope you got something out of it. I think this is a very important. We talk some about some very important subjects here, that anybody in any walk of life can get something out of. So, thank you to all the listeners. Thank you again, Karen and Brittany, and we look
Thank
forward to
you.
seeing you next time.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks, Matt.
Thanks.